There are a group of black people that I absolutely cannot stand, and I unfortunately need to talk about them. This is the whole "we not from Africa" crowd, we the real Native Americans, led by the DANE Calloways and those types. Here's the thing: racism is at the core of all of this. Racism has made it impossible for black people to trust anything, and I get that. Like, if white folk have lied to you about everything, yeah, you question everything. It's no different than a woman who's been horribly abused by a lot of men, and you meet a nice guy, and it's hard to kind of see, like, no, he's actually nice. Like, I actually get that. The problem I'm having with that crowd is y'all are skeptical and questioning the wrong stuff. I need you to question why the NBA is 70, 80% black, and black people have no control in that industry. I need you to question and be skeptical about the fact that we just accept white dominance as our reality. That all the institutions and everything in society is controlled by white people and we are at their whim. I need you to be skeptical of that and why we accept that as like a normal thing. And so I was talking to a guy, and so he was telling me that Dane is even talking about Harriet Tubman, ain't real. Like, okay, there are people who deny the Holocaust, for example. And if you told a Jewish person, well, the Holocaust didn't happen, they would be quite offended. You don't think I, as a black man, am not offended when you play with my history and deny what my people have done, our achievements and our struggle? I find it quite offensive. Do you know the depth of what Harriet Tubman as an individual did? And to take that from her, like, that's actually not okay with me. So I want to be fair. These people are in two buckets, right? Well, several buckets. So let me be fair. One is the most extreme. These are the people who say the transatlantic slave trade just didn't happen, just made it all up. Okay, so in history, you can question narratives, right? So I talked about in a video I did the other week about the Underground Railroad. There's this narrative, and many people to this day think that white people largely are responsible for the Underground Railroad and hid people in basements. Okay, well, we have other scholarship that says, well, you know what? It looks like white scholars centered white people, but if you look at the numbers, overwhelmingly people traveled by water. They were transported by black men that we call blackjacks. Okay, so we can challenge that narrative. But what you can't do is undocument what is documented. What those white people did, it is documented, sure, but let's challenge the narrative. I have a birthday coming up, April 23rd. Okay, I have a birth certificate. There are witnesses. There is corroborating evidence. I am documented. You can't undocument me. So we need to distinguish between narratives and what is documented. The transatlantic slave trade is well documented. This isn't about one person saying something. This is multinational. So you have the Dutch, you have the Portuguese, you have the Spanish, you have the British. A lot of different nations are involved. And this is big business. And money leaves a trail, so there's a lot of documentation. You have banks, you have insurance companies, you have slave trading companies. Like, there are a lot of private businesses in addition to these governments, the church. You have the testimony of people who survived the transatlantic slave trade. It's a lot of documentation from unrelated sources saying the same thing. So we feel pretty good about that. And so they'll say, well, what about the ships? What ships? Well, the Smithsonian has an entire project dedicated to these shipwrecks. So we have found the ships. Now, if your question is, why don't we have more ships? The ocean is so big and broad that if there was a ship literally sitting on the surface of the ocean, nobody may find it because it's just a lot of area to search. However, if you're talking about a ship that gets wrecked or sinks a couple hundred years ago, the ocean is quite literally in places tens of thousands of feet deep. You're not finding that ever. So this is Looney Tune Town. This is Crazy Town. To engage with these people, and here's the problem. Well, before I get to the problem, let's deal with that second bucket. This other bucket of people they will say, well, yeah, the slave trade, it happened, but like, it wasn't that big. Most of us, we was already here. Or at least some super substantial portion of us. They are a little bit more dangerous because it's no different than like a historical fiction or historical fantasy novel where it's based in some history. There's something real, but then we make up a story around that, and then people believe that that story is actual history. Well, no, it's entertainment. And so it is here, right? That's very problematic. You have to have evidence. You have to document things. So people like that, they're going to lean on Leo Wiener, right? And so he writes Africa and the Discovery of America. They're going to lean on people like, what's the brother's name? He wrote They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America. Ivan Van Sertima. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. No disrespect to him. So they're going to take those sources. Well, again, it's understandable. The American academies have been so racist. It's hard to trust anything. And so you hear something different. It's like, yep, see, they've been hiding the truth. Well, these things haven't really stood up to peer review in many ways. But we do have some things that I think should be taken seriously that the white academy largely has not. So we know, for example, that Columbus writes about the Africans having a way to the West. And so it points towards African exploration of the West. Well, first of all, what does that mean in that context? Because Christopher Columbus didn't know where he was half the time. So what does that mean, the West? Does that mean Virginia? Right? That's vague. We know about Mali sending explorers west. But we just don't know a lot about that. There's not a lot that we know. We should take this seriously. We should investigate that. We should look for further evidence. We want to know more about that. And I don't think the White Academy is taking that very seriously. We know about another explorer, Balboa. He talks about coming upon an African settlement in Panama. That is extremely interesting. That is extremely important. We need to take that seriously. It does open up more possibilities of Western exploration by Africans before Columbus. That's great. They're going to talk about in Mexico the Olmec heads. These are these big sort of statues, and they have what looks like very African features. And so they say, oh, see, there, we were there. Okay, well, hold on. At this point, most scholars are like, this doesn't appear to be African people. This may just be the people who were there. They look maybe something like that. Because again, we all came from Africa ultimately. That's what we like to say, right? Maybe, but here's the real big problem. These heads are from like 1000 BC. Is it feasible that 1000 BC African or anybody are doing transatlantic trips by boat? Right? I mean, that's a long journey. Would they even know how long it is to know how much food to pack? Like, maybe, I don't know. I'm saying we should look into that. But the evidence isn't really hard yet. It's not ironclad just yet. And people say, well, what about Pangea? Right? So all these continents are one. Okay, well, Pangea is millions of years ago. Pangea was not 1000 BC, right? So that doesn't really work, right? I'm not sure about that part. So again, there are some strands to pull, and I think we should pull them, and we should do so in earnest, and we should investigate them. But you can't just make that next step. Say, oh, we was just all here. Again, if I'm in Chicago, I live in Chicago, and someone says, I'm accusing you of a murder in Atlanta, you better have some solid evidence. It can't just be one guy said it or two people wanted to be true, so they said, where's the corroborating evidence? And so when we come talk about the Cherokee or the Arawak, these indigenous nations, we have corroborating evidence. We have archaeological evidence. We have their testimony. We know Europeans come and say, hey, we see all these people. Well, Europeans knew what Africans looked like. If they saw Africans, they would have said, we saw Africans, right? Balboa said, hey, there's an African settlement. We don't see them saying, I came to Virginia and saw Africans. That's not what they say. You have to have corroborating evidence, and we just don't have it. We have some things, though, that point to early African exploration, and we should take those seriously. And I'm open to that. But it's kind of like saying, well, black people founded Chicago. True. There's a Haitian explorer named Dusable. He comes here, got it. But he didn't come here and establish Wakanda. That's not what happened. Black people are not in Chicago in any meaningful numbers until the Great Migration. So two things can be true. You can have African exploration, but you don't have meaningful, enduring African settlements that we know of yet. And maybe there are. Right? And so some will get cute and say, well, there was only few 100,000 that came here. What about the rest? We was already here. This is basic math, right? In 1860, we have a census, the last one before the Civil War. There's 488,000 free black people. There's 4 million black slaves. Slaves were bred and bred aggressively. So it's not a big stretch of the imagination to go from 380,000 to several million over a couple hundred years. That's just basic breeding. There's no conspiracy there. Well, how do we know we can trust the census data and all that? You got it. You don't have to trust white people. Trust that people want to make money and people want power. These are capitalists. This is big business. So they're documenting everything. They're keeping close tabs on their inventory. We even know something about what slaves are eating because they're keeping count of their diet. They're trying to turn a profit. Don't feed them this much, feed them this much, feed them this, not that. Like, okay, now when it comes to the census data, again, people want power. So the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, you count slaves as 3/5 of a person. They want to count everybody. It's in their interest. So we feel pretty good about those numbers. And in fact, if you go through the census data, they will have like, okay, this many people in this house, this person's a free black, this person's a slave. Like, they're really meticulously trying to document this because they have a vested interest in it. Everything in a conspiracy. Get skeptical about the right things. And the problem is with this crowd, how, and this is my question, how do we have meaningful dialogue if everything is a conspiracy? No matter what I say, if it doesn't line up with your preferred view of the world, it's a conspiracy. I can bring 1,000 documents saying Harriet Tubman existed, the slave trade existed. Here's a conspiracy. I can have 1 million scholars do peer-reviewed research. It's a conspiracy by the white man. Okay, so the white man, he just don't want us to know that this is our land. Got it. But why would the Dutch care about that? Why would the Portuguese care about your American story? They don't. Seriously, how do we have a dialogue though if nothing I can bring to you is valid? It's all a conspiracy. If I say, okay, well, what about these black scholars? They're part of the conspiracy. But if you find one little thing that lines up with what you want to believe, that's the truth that's been hidden. My question is, how do we have dialogue under those conditions? We can't. We absolutely, we can't have a dialogue in that case. So again, as a black man, I am offended when you play with my history. When you play with the suffering of my people. Don't do that. Go play with somebody else. If you want to be skeptical about white people, I get it. Racism has done that. Totally get it. Let's be skeptical about the right things though, because here's the thing. Let's say you had the smoking gun and you could prove that we were all here, hundreds of thousands of us, just walk around Virginia and Maryland when white folk got here. They're going to say, that's cute. And what? The Native Americans, they said it was their land. How did that work out? They don't care. That is not going to do anything to benefit our situation. And I think that the reality of blackness and our reality sometimes is so sad that people would rather just make up a fantasy. If your reality is sad, just make up fantasy. I don't like white supremacy, so let's make up a story of black supremacy. How does that help you? Here's the thing. We have to be sober-minded and really deal with our condition. We live under white dominance. It's going to take a lot of years, dedication, and discipline to combat that. That sounds way less fun than just making up a story. But it doesn't serve us. It doesn't help us. It doesn't bring us to any place of power. It does nothing for that. And so the DANE Calloways, it's no different than like Pizzagate a few years ago with Hillary Clinton. You know, they're supposedly eating babies at this pizza place or whatever. And people say, oh, that's nuts. How is this different? How is this less nuts? It is nuts and it is offensive. And so people like the DANE Calloways really do need to be stopped.